Welcome back, everyone. So, in our first of two videos about virtue theory, we gave it a basic definition, and we defined some keywords central to the theory and common to virtue theorists, even if they disagree about a few other things. We talked about how virtue is reasoned, goal-directed action, which moral agents learn to perform habitually and as an aspect of their character. We also dug a bit deeper into what virtue theorists could mean by practical wisdom to see why they would say that the virtuous person guiding themselves by reason will be able to apply virtue to new circumstances, why they won't be stuck in a static pattern of good behavior. That addressed a first big objection to virtue theory, which was that it would lead to static values. Certainly, there's a lot to discuss on the question whether virtue theory has a sufficient answer to this objection, but I'll leave that to you. In this video, there are two other main objections we want to take seriously, and which were part of our initial outline. One, that virtue theory provides no action guidance, what I'll call the no rules, no right objection. And two, that it gives an indeterminate sense of what the human goods are. The first of these basically says, if we don't know what action to choose in any particular case, all we know is just be courageous, whatever that means, then maybe an ethical theory like this just isn't going to be of much use to us. And the second says basically, if we can't pinpoint which human goods are truly good, why, for instance, courage and not pleasure-seeking drug use, then we can't know that the disciplined pursuit of them, however goal-oriented it might be, is in fact good. Lots of things humans do could be redescribed as goals. Which ones are the virtues? The first of these problems Annis takes up as the reasons for action problem, and what she also calls the action guidance problem as well. The objection is basically this. Since virtue theory doesn't result in any specific, neatly written rules of the don't do this ever variety, then it can't really provide us with what we need in an ethical theory, action guidance. That's why I call it the no rules, no right objection. Ethicists sometimes call this providing a decision procedure. Some of them think that what ethics is supposed to be doing as a field is that it's supposed to provide a decision procedure. For instance, gather this evidence, judge the evidence in these ways, apply these rules to it, then voila, you have a decision. Now, there's justifiable doubt about whether that at all captures how ethical decisions really get made, especially within organizations, complex associations, or states. We'll discuss some of those. But we can see already that it's not what virtue theory is talking about. Virtue theory doesn't urge you to apply rules of any sort. Annis says that if you are habituated into virtue, if you have the sort of character that gives you a settled disposition to do the virtuous thing, you'll almost immediately know what the circumstances you're in call for and know what the virtuous action is. You'll do it in the way that you've learned it. Now, you don't need decision-making steps. You have a bias for action. You understand the circumstances from your experience, and you don't need rules either. In fact, rules would just hold you back from applying your virtues to the new circumstances. Let me illustrate this with an example from Annis. She comes back to the loyalty example on page 28 to 29 of Intelligent Virtue, asking what appeal the drug user could make to her loyal friend. Annis says basically, imagine that the drug user simply insisted, be loyal to me. If we took loyalty as a rule, then maybe the drug user would be right. The rule would be unbreakable. It would have independent force. It would obligate us. But Annis says, we wouldn't think of that as loyalty anymore, would we? We'd think of it as unreasoning attachment. Far better if the loyal friend had the character to pursue the good that loyalty is all about, a good which is actually abstracted away from any particular circumstances, a good which will guide the virtuous person to know how to act and not to act according to what best pursues that good. The friendship is actually for betterment and the real good of the friend. It's not simply for loyalty, do or die. So the loyal friend will pursue that good, betterment. Indeed, Ennis says it's somewhat weird to think that the person who practiced being loyal, and because of that had a loyal character, would somehow reach this decision point in their life and think, gosh, I don't know what to do. I need a rule. The precise thing she learned from experience was how to act. Ennis says on page 32, if we are left puzzled by the question how our practical understanding guides us to act, we've been learning the wrong thing. That's how she dismisses the action guidance objection. But what about the final objection, that virtue theory, perhaps especially in Ennis's version of it, leaves us with no determinate goods to point to as being the virtues that we can certainly pursue as objective goods. As we saw, Ennis herself does indeed want to leave a little bit open which goals the virtuous person will have. Now, some have interpreted her in a particular way. They think that she's saying that so long as you encourage some virtue skills, there are certain basic human goods that people will gravitate towards, at least. Others they'll gravitate away from. Take, for instance, the loyalty and drug use example. She seems to play on some underlying intuition that you might share with her that drug use is bad in and of itself. That's how she seems to make that argument. Now I'm going to leave it for you to decide if that's what she means, or if she's much more open to the idea that there are a plurality of potential goods that humans can pursue, all consistent with calling them virtues. But nevertheless, some virtue theorists have objected to her view, saying it doesn't really provide a clear answer to what the objectively good human functions are. They think that if you don't provide such an answer, other ethical theorists are just going to have an easy time rejecting virtue theory. Take murder, for instance. It is human, at least in the sense that people seem to do it in all cultures at all times. Murder could be a skill. So, is it a virtue? I don't know. All sorts of horrible things are human. So, many virtue theorists insist that you need to specify more correctly what is natural to humans or what is fundamentally good for them in order to head off this easy objection that we're considering right now. Grisey and Boyle could provide this extra step for us, as could George and Lee. These are both readings available to you on Canvas. Now, one caveat. We're going to categorize all their theories with virtue theory. Grisey and Boyle use the word uprightness, which we might think of as virtue or a character trait at least. But it would be more correct to categorize theirs as new natural law theories or as modern natural law jurisprudence. If the question is, what makes a human action truly right, their answer is something like the natural law knowable by reason, or what amounts to much the same thing, the basic human goods, which by their very nature entail a series of knowable, unbreakable responsibilities. So, you see, they're talking more about law, rules, and responsibilities, even obligations that they argue are binding. So their ideas share some features with deontological thought, as you'll no doubt recognize by now. But we're going to see what we could do with their concept of human good to supplement virtue theory and answer that objection about no determinate goods in virtue theory. First overlap we might notice is that for Grisey and Boyle, the human goods are said to lead to flourishing, just as Ennis says. They list things like human life, knowledge, and aesthetic experience as basic human goods. Right? These aren't attributes of character per se, they're attributes of the ends our actions pursue and should not violate. But what's interesting is the way they claim to know that these human goods are truly good. That's our question right now. They indicate a sort of standard, according to which your actions should be capable of being judged by any reasonable being as upright. Or another way of stating it would be that any reasonable being would find that life worth living. On page 336 of a supplementary reading on Canvas, they say basically this. Upright persons, they say, want to make sure that their own lives will meet the test of reasonableness, will be examined lives worth living by persons conscious and grateful for the human capacity for rational reflection and self-criticism. Notice what they're saying here. Not an examined life worth living by the self alone, but by any conscious, rational persons. So here's why some people sometimes group these theories together. It's clear that Grisey and Boyle are trying to provide the fundamental truth that many virtue theorists find lacking in Ennis. If you were looking for an objective or an external verification that some of the goods a virtuous person pursues really are good, not just what are good for her at the moment, then you would need to judge these goods from some perspective like this natural law theory, the perspective allowing you to say that any reasonable person would see these things as good. And they think they can answer the objection that natural human goods are indeterminate. On page 344 of that supplementary source I just mentioned, they say, if nature is considered not merely as a given, but as a normative ideal, then naturalness is equivalent to what human persons ought to be. Okay, a bit confusing, right? Let me give you a common example to illustrate this idea. Glasses. It is, of course, natural for me to have astigmatism, for instance. Perfectly natural. But there are some things in nature that we strive to correct. To paraphrase Grisey and Boyle, then, natural eyesight is not a given, but a normative ideal. And so naturalness here is equivalent to what human eyesight ought to be. So one could use their ideas to differentiate between candidate virtues. Which of the virtues are actually good for humans? Which really lead to human flourishing? Grisey and Boyle differentiate good and bad through the example of cancer on page 362 of the assigned reading from them. Growing cancer is a human potential, but it's a bad one because it deprives the person of the fullest realization of their life and hence of all their potentials. For instance, they say on 363, the goodness of the person lies in realizing not all potentialities for action, but rather in realizing those which are conducive to fuller and the fullest self-realization. Okay, so to combine this with Ennis's view, we would look for those skills that lead to our full self-realization as opposed to stunting our growth. Drugs, perhaps, would be the example. They stunt rather than help us self-realize, at least in the usual understanding of drugs, notwithstanding some who would say that they do realize a higher self through psychedelic or other drug experiences. Okay, but finally, how do we know that some self-realization is really ultimate self-realization for humans? Take a look at one of the supplementary readings by George and Lee. They say that if you ask why a person has chosen an action, what good it would pursue, then they're usually going to indicate in their response to you some other good that the action pursued. And there's usually then a chain of such connections. I worked hard to make money, but the money was to support my family. And family itself is the site of loving and meaningful relationship, so really my actions were to bring about love and meaningfulness. When you follow the chain of reasoning all the way out, seeing how each good was chosen in furtherance of another, you end up with the basic human goods. As Lee and George say on 90, the chain of instrumental goods cannot be infinite, so there must be some ultimate reasons for one's choices, some goods that one recognizes as reasons for choosing, which need no further support and are not mere means to some further good. Could the virtues themselves be of this character? Could it be that we pursue certain virtues for no other reason than that they are final in this sense? Could it be that we do virtuous actions and work to perfect them for no other reason than that it is fundamentally self-realizing to practice these skills, pursuing goods with reasoned choice? And could it be that the very exercise of these skills simply is human flourishing? That's the question that I'm going to leave you with about virtue theory.